country is now facing an unprecedented supply chain crisis that we have not experienced since the Carter administration, before I was born, just in time for the holiday season. This is Joe Biden's holiday gift to Americans. And make no mistake, this is a direct result of Joe Biden's failed leadership and his build-backed bankrupt agenda. And yet, as the American people are suffering crisis after crisis, this week, House Democrats have returned to Washington in complete disarray, with their eyes set on a tax and spend package totaling over $5 trillion. But it's important for the American people to know, it is not just the top-line price tag of this bill. It's not the fact that it's just the largest tax and spending package in our nation's history. It is also the fact that this Democrats' reconciliation bill is riddled and chock full of far-left socialist policies that the American people do not support, including a Made in America tax that imposes $2.1 trillion in tax increases, propping up Green New Deal at the expense of small businesses, reducing our energy independence, and implementing a gas tax and a heat your home tax. And it supports mass amnesty. The bottom line is, at a time when inflation is skyrocketing, gas prices are surging, and we have a supply chain crisis that's leaving grocery store shelves empty, Democrats are proposing zero solutions and instead are discussing a far-left tax and spend bill that will make these crises worse and bankrupt America. Today, we're going to hear from Mike McCaul, Michelle Steele, and Whip Scalise. And with that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, the ranking member of Foreign Affairs Committee, Mike McCaul.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise. Let me say we do have an economic crisis with this Democrat agenda, and we also have a border crisis, and we have a national security crisis. I was around during the Carter years, and there's a lot of similarities, particularly terrorists taking over our United States embassy in Iran, and now we have an unconditional surrender to the Taliban, which was humiliating for the United States and projects weakness, not strength. That's what I remember the Carter years, and this is a replication, if not worse, of those years. A year ago, I chaired the China Task Force. We came out with this report, and a year ago we warned that China was leading in hypersonics, these hypersonic missiles. Reporting now has come out that they launched a hypersonic weapon, a missile, in August, that was able to go all the way around the world and go to its target, missing only by about 20 or so miles. This is very disturbing. It's a wake-up call. It's a Sputnik moment, if you will, the space race. This is why we formed the Space Force. This is why we put more funding into the NDAA for hypersonics. But the fact is, we need to catch up. And China is starting to lead the edge. These are very frightening missiles because they can go undetected. We don't have a missile defense system that can stop them. They go at 5 times the speed of sound, and they zigzag and go undetected. Most disturbing to me is they were built on the backbone of American technology that China has either stolen over the years, or we have given to them, or we have sold it to them. We need stronger export controls to stop this from happening. When we are funding the PLA through our capital flows and through our technology transfers, building these hypersonic weapons, the CIA director, Burns, said that Beijing poses the most important geopolitical threat to the United States in the 21st century. And I agree with him. Clearly, President Xi and the CCP are testing this president, who's projecting weakness, not strength, all around the world. Putin is going to see this as well, and he's going to be looking at Ukraine. CCP is going to be looking at Taiwan. When they see weakness, they're going to go in just like they did in Hong Kong and take over Taiwan. Unlike Russia, we have no treaties with China when it comes to hypersonics or even nuclear technology. The chairwoman and I called for the New START negotiations to include China. But also, if we're going to do New START, let's do it for 1 year and then try to get China into the deal. It's extremely important that this administration engage in discussions now with the CCP on these hypersonic missiles that are so dangerous to our national security and to the world. And so with that, I'd love to introduce Congresswoman Michelle Steele from the great state of California. And Michelle.
Thank you very much. Good morning. We have a crisis happening in our ports, especially in California. Yesterday, the backlog at the ports were the worst it has ever been. 100 ships were waiting to enter the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach ports yesterday. That sets a new record. Another 45 ships are expected to arrive on Thursday, tomorrow. Where are these ships supposed to go? The ports are supposed to be operating 24/7, but it's clear it isn't happening yet. These supply chain issues are affecting every single American. These ships should be able to pull up to the port, unload, and leave. Instead, they are idling off our coastline right off my district. Our community is still dealing with the fallout from the devastating oil spill that was caused by a ship's anchor hitting a pipeline, direct result of the administration's failure to address this issue. The morning after the spill, I asked President Biden for a major disaster declaration for Orange County, which would bring much-needed resources to our community. I never heard back. Yesterday, a majority of local bipartisan officials from Orange County wrote to President in support of this request, and we still haven't gotten a response. And because of their failure to respond to this crisis, last week I introduced the SHIP Act, which would ban these ships from idling or anchoring off the shore for the next 180 days. We've heard silence from congressional Democrats. They don't want to address any of this or address the real problems. That's because Democrats in Washington want to enact the same failed policies that are contributing to this problem in California. These same failed liberal policies that make it harder for independent contractors like truckers who help to move cargo from our ports to work in California. I support getting these ships moving and getting our ports working again, but we need to solve these bigger supply chain issues and doubling down on failing economic policies that make life for American businesses and workers harder and more expensive. Thank you. And next is our Republican Whip Scalise.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and it's really good to have Elise back. So I know after beautiful baby Sam, she showed us some pictures today, very, very happy baby, but it's really good to have her back here in person. And, you know, when you look at what's going on this week, it's unbelievable that when you see just a wave of crises after crises facing hardworking families, there is not a single bill on the floor this week to address any of the crises that families are facing. Clearly, the inflation crisis is probably the biggest cut to the paychecks of lower income and middle income families. When you look at all of the goods that are up, gasoline over 40% higher, bacon 19% higher, used cars more than 30% more. If you can find an appliance, you're going to probably pay 30% more for it because of the supply chain crisis. And yet not a single bill on the floor this week to address any of those crises. In fact, this week you see another attempt by Speaker Pelosi and the far-left socialists who are driving the agenda to try to pass this massive multi-trillion-dollar tax and spend bill that would make inflation even worse. It would make these crises even worse. When you look at the package that they're trying to get passed at any cost, whether it's $1 trillion or more, it would be devastating to lower-income families. When President Biden promised that anybody who makes under $400,000 won't pay a dime in new taxes, families already know that's a lie because they're paying more today for Biden's inflation, which is a tax on low-income families at the highest level. And then you add on top of that trillions in new spending, things like a natural gas tax. Any family who uses natural gas in America will pay more if that bill were to become law. And they're already paying too much for energy. Energy costs are higher. Under this bill, over a 14% increase in energy costs for families. When you look at some of the other proposals and what they would do to spend this money, they want to hire another 80,000 IRS agents. Who in America thinks that having 80,000 more IRS agents is a good thing for them and their paychecks? Especially when the Biden administration wants to track every financial transaction over $600, and that's cumulative. Everything you spend, they want to track, and they'll have 80,000 more IRS agents to do just that. That will hit lower and middle income families harder than they're already being hit. And now they're trying to lower expectations for Christmas, for goodness sake. Why don't they bring bills to the floor to address those crises that they created? They can fix these crises. The border crisis can be reversed tomorrow if they just go back to the policies that were working before President Biden took office. And instead, they want to double down. They're flying thousands of people at dark of night on 2 a.m. flights to states. They don't even give a heads up to those states of who they're sending and how many. And they're trying to be secretive about all of this. This has to end. American people are demanding that we get back to sane, sound policy that works for hardworking families. That's what we as House Republicans are going to continue to promote. Policies that work for hardworking families instead of policies that are going to continue to increase inflation, to raise spending in Washington at the expense of middle class and lower income families. So that would be happy to take some questions.
Which, Scalise, you're talking about these crises. Taking a look at the future, at the election 2022, what effect do you think these crises will have on the Biden administration and the Democratic Party?
Well, families are already revolting, and you can see with swing voters how they've shifted away from President Biden, and that's just after 10 months. And he's spent trillions of dollars already. The problem is he wants to double down and go even further towards the big government socialist left. And that's only going to make inflation worse. It's only going to make these crises worse. And families have already had enough. And so you would think they would finally start wanting to work with Republicans. You know, come meet with Sam Graves and put together an infrastructure bill where Republicans and Democrats could unite here in the House on a bill that would get over 350 votes. But they won't even have that conversation. And I think people are fed up with the far left movement of these big government socialists. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, sir. So the full House is going to consider contempt of Congress for Mr. Bannon. How important is it for congressional subpoenas to be upheld?
Well, if you look at what they're doing, this whole commission started off as a very partisan exercise. They really didn't want to get a true working relationship, and in fact, Pelosi rejected some of McCarthy's picks to the commission, which has never happened before. So they're not trying to get at the truth. They want to just continue trying to create distractions so they don't have to talk about the crises that they've created on every level. They don't want to deal with inflation. They want to hope it goes away, but it's not going away. In fact, it's getting worse. And ultimately, they're going to be judged on how their policies affect regular people across America. And right now, it's a devastating impact that these far-left socialist items have had on those families.
But isn't it likely that a number of Republicans could vote to hold him in contempt because it's important that congressional subpoenas hold water?
I think you're seeing most members get tired of the witch hunts and the games. Let's focus on policies that affect everyday families right now instead of these partisan witch hunts that they want to keep going on.
But would you be concerned in 2022 what that does if you all take back the majority?
Oh, well, ultimately, there ought to be oversight going on, bringing in cabinet secretaries. Why isn't Pete Buttigieg coming before committees talking about the supply chain backlog and what they've done to create this problem and what is their plan to get us out of it? Why aren't they bringing in the energy secretary and the interior secretary to talk about the shortage of energy? Look at natural gas prices going up here in America, 13-year high on natural gas prices. In Europe, it's even worse, by the way, which is a harbinger of things to come. There are things we could be doing here in America to produce more of our own energy instead of President Biden begging OPEC and Russia, which, by the way, they emit more carbon than when we produce oil here in America. We should be making more energy in America, not less. We should be having hearings and oversight on that. They don't want to have hearings and oversight on that because it'll expose their failures. The border crisis, the origins of the virus that started in the Wuhan lab, most likely by all experts, that have been willing to speak about it publicly. What Mike McCall has done with the China task force to expose so many threats that are being posed by China, they won't have a hearing on any of that. And frankly, I think Americans are fed up with it.
Congressman Fortenberry was indicted yesterday. Has he voluntarily left his committee slots, or do you think the Congress is going to have to take action?
I haven't talked to him about that. Obviously, we know what the rule is, but Jeff Fortenberry is one of the most decent people that we serve with, and people on both sides of the aisle have tremendous respect for him. I know he's vowed to fight this. He's a man of deep faith, too, by the way, and so I keep him and his family in my prayers.
Do you think he should leave the committee, though?
Well, the rule is very clear that while you're facing those kind of legal actions, then you would have to step down from your committees.
So when would you like that to happen?
Well, I'll be talking to the leader, and clearly we're gonna work through that.
All right, Mr. Scalise, do you have some thoughts on the White House push, details are still coming, to support labor unionization?
Well, look at the PRO Act. This has been the Democrats' push to try to force unionization on people who have rejected it in normal votes. In labor law has been fought out by both sides. Business and labor have fought to get rules that are clear, that have been established for decades. President Biden's been trying to undermine that for a long time, and in fact, if you look at their big government socialist spending bill, even things like electric vehicle credits, they won't allow them to apply if the car wasn't built with union labor. So if a car is built in a right-to-work state by non-union labor, that electric vehicle won't get the credits, but a union-built electric vehicle will. People are tired of these Washington bureaucrats picking winners and losers and trying to force unions on people who have rejected them in the past. And so I think it's the wrong direction, and it undermines the delicate balance of labor law that's been established for decades.
Last question.
Yeah.
Do you think it was appropriate for former President Donald Trump to criticize Colin Powell in the immediate wake of his death?
Look, I mean, Colin Powell, you can see Republican and Democrats alike have served with him, have in different capacities in the military. He served under multiple presidents. He was an American hero, and anytime you lose somebody like that, you mourn the loss. And policy differences aside, you surely mourn the loss of someone like him.
What do you think of
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Did President Trump's statement about the election fraud create more problems and possibly depress voters for you guys?
Look, voters have never been more motivated to get out and vote. If the election was tomorrow, I think that's the biggest thing that Nancy Pelosi and her far-left socialists are scared of. But the problems that they've created are not going away. In fact, they're getting worse because they've doubled down on a big government socialist agenda. And that's ultimately what they're going to be judged on next year. I wish they would focus on solving these problems instead of making them worse. And so I think you're going to see a very high turnout, and I think you're going to see a lot more Democrat loss. Look, you had 2 more Democrats earlier this week announce they're retiring. You don't announce you're retiring when you're in the majority if you don't think that the voters are going to really have a strong say in rejecting this big government socialism next year. Thank you all.
Thanks.